The war against the Harkin swarm lasted 11 months. When it finally ended, the galaxy was a different place. 23 Velran worlds had been destroyed completely. Over 7 billion Velran citizens had died. But it could have been much worse. It should have been much worse. Without human intervention, the entire empire would have been consumed. The last of the swarm retreating into the darkness beyond known space. Human ships followed them as far as they could, destroying any stragglers, making sure they could not rebuild. Admiral Sunho finally ordered the pursuit to stop when they reached the edge of map territory. "Let them go," he said. "We have done what we came to do. The Velran Empire is safe. It is time to go home." Commander Taiho stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dawn and watched the darkness swallow the last of the machines. He had been fighting for almost a year. He had seen things no person should ever see. He had lost friends, soldiers who trusted him, people who had followed him into battle and never come out. He was tired. Tired in ways that sleep could not fix. The human fleet turned toward home. But before they could leave Velran space, a message arrived from Queen Myray. It was short and formal, but the words carried weight that her previous messages had never held. "Commander Taiho, I request your presence in my throne room. Please." Taiho stared at the message for a long time. He thought about ignoring it. He thought about telling the Queen that he was too busy, that he had more important things to do. He thought about silence, the same silence he had given her a year ago. But something had changed. He was not the same man who had walked out of that throne room. The war had taught him things about himself, about his people, about what really mattered. "Tell the Queen I will come," he said. The Eternal Dawn entered orbit around the Velran homeworld. Taiho took a shuttle down to the surface alone. No guards, no escorts. Just one human soldier walking back into the place where he had been humiliated. The city looked different now. Before, it had been proud and perfect, every building a monument to Velran superiority. Now, there were scars. Burned sections where the ground swarm had broken through before human forces pushed them back. Memorial walls covered with names of the dead. Citizens who looked at humans with something that was not quite gratitude, but was no longer contempt. The palace still stood, though even it showed damage. The giant crystal pillars were cracked. The ceiling paintings were faded. The golden light still poured through the tall windows, but it seemed softer now, less arrogant. Taiho walked through the great hall. There were no nobles this time. No crowds of beautiful people laughing and pointing. Just empty space and echoing footsteps. Queen Myray waited at the end of the hall. She was not sitting on her throne. She stood at the bottom of the steps, dressed in simple clothes without jewels or crowns. She looked older than she had a year ago. She looked tired. She looked human. Taiho stopped at the proper distance. He did not bow. He simply waited. For a long moment, they looked at each other in silence. The same silence that had filled this room when Taiho walked away. But this time, the silence meant something different. Queen Myray spoke first. Her voice was quiet, nothing like the ringing confidence she had shown before. "Commander Taiho, thank you for coming." He said nothing. "I have been practicing what to say to you," the Queen continued. "I have written 100 speeches. I have rehearsed 1,000 apologies. But now that you are standing here, none of them seem right." She took a deep breath. "So I will simply tell you the truth." She walked forward until she was standing directly in front of him. Then, slowly and deliberately, she knelt on the floor. The Queen of the Velran Empire, ruler of a civilization 100,000 years old, knelt before a human soldier. "I was wrong," she said, "about everything. I looked at your short lives and saw weakness. I should have seen urgency, the need to make every moment matter. I looked at your small bodies and saw fragility. I should have seen adaptation, the ability to survive in places where larger creatures would fail. I looked at your young civilization and saw primitives. I should have seen potential, the speed with which you learn and grow and become more. She looked up at him with eyes that were wet with tears. I called you insects. And then those insects came back to save my people when no one else would. Your soldiers died protecting strangers who had mocked them. Your medics healed wounds for patients who had laughed at them. Your commander led charge after charge into darkness, risking his own life for an empire that had offered him nothing but contempt. Queen Marae's voice broke. Why? Why did you do it? Why did you save us after what I said to you? Taiho was silent for a long time. He thought about all the answers he could give. He could have talked about strategy, about stopping the swarm before it reached human space. He could have talked about politics, about the value of having the Velran Empire owe humanity a debt. He could have talked about many things that were true, but not the whole truth. Instead, he offered her his hand. She looked at it in confusion. Then, understanding dawned in her eyes. She took his hand, and he helped her rise to her feet. Your insult revealed your ignorance, your majesty, Taiho said finally. It did not reveal our weakness. You judged us by our appearances, by our lifespans, by the age of our civilization. But you missed what truly matters, which is, humans do not prove themselves with words. We do not win arguments by shouting louder or living longer. We prove ourselves when the universe demands an answer. When everything falls apart and hope seems lost. When the darkness comes and there is no one left to help. That is when you see what humanity truly is. He gestured around the damaged throne room. Your empire is 100,000 years old. You have seen 1,000 civilizations rise and fall. But in all that time, did you ever think to ask yourself why humanity survived? Why we crawled out of our small planet and spread across the stars? Why we keep fighting when every other species would have given up long ago? Queen Mirae shook her head slowly. We survive because we refuse to accept endings, Taiho said. We fight because that is all we know how to do. We help each other because we understand something that long-lived species often forget. Life is short, and the only thing that matters is what we do with the time we have. He looked directly into her eyes. You called us insects. Fine. Insects are small, but they build colonies that cover continents. Insects are simple, but they outnumber every other creature on any world they touch. Insects are weak, but together they can strip a forest to bare earth or feed an entire ecosystem. His voice hardened just slightly. Never underestimate insects, Your Majesty. They have a way of surprising you. Queen Mirae nodded slowly. I have learned that lesson. I have paid for that lesson with the blood of my people. She straightened her shoulders. I would like to repay the debt somehow, but I do not know how. There is no debt, Taiho said. We did not come to collect payment. We came because innocent people were dying, and we had the power to stop it. That is the human way. We do not help people because they deserve it. We help them because we can. The queen was silent for a moment. Then she said, Will you stay? Will humanity accept an alliance with the Voran Empire? Not as superiors and inferiors, but as equals? Taiho considered the question carefully. He thought about everything that had happened. The insults, the laughter, the war, the sacrifice. Was it possible to move forward after all of that? Yes, he said finally. We will accept an alliance, but not because you apologized, and not because you knelt before me. We will accept because the universe is dangerous, and we are all stronger together than we are apart. He offered his hand again. This time, in the human gesture of agreement. Queen Mirae took it without hesitation. In that moment, something new was born. Not a relationship built on pride or ancient history. Not an alliance of convenience or necessity. Something real, forged in fire and blood and sacrifice. A partnership between two civilizations that had finally learned to see each other clearly. The news spread across the galaxy. Humans and Velrons working together. The insects and the immortals standing side by side. It should have been impossible. It should have been laughable. But no one laughed anymore. Commander Taiho returned to Earth as a hero. They offered him promotions, medals, titles of every kind. He refused them all. He asked only for a small ship and permission to explore the edges of known space. Why? Admiral Sunho asked. You can have anything you want. Taiho smiled, a real smile this time, full of warmth. Because there are more species out there who think they know what humanity is. More civilizations who look at us and see insects. More queens who need to learn what I taught my Ray. His smile sharpened into something more dangerous. And I would like to give them the lesson personally. Admiral Sunho laughed and approved the request. Taiho flew into the darkness, alone but not lonely. Behind him, the stars shone bright with possibility. In front of him, countless worlds waited to learn what humanity truly was. Not insects. Not primitives. Not temporary creatures playing at being important. Just humans. Stubborn, stupid, magnificent humans, walking into the unknown, ready for anything, silent until they needed to speak. And when they finally spoke, the whole universe listened. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like thunder breaking through clouds. 200 ships, each one a weapon of war, unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They were not elegant like Velron vessels. They were not beautiful or graceful. They were ugly, brutal things made of thick armor and heavy guns. Designed for one purpose only, to survive the worst the universe could throw at them and keep fighting. At the front of the fleet flew the dreadnought Eternal Dawn. And at its helm stood Commander Taiho. The Harken swarm was attacking a major Velron world called Brighthold. 15 billion people lived there. They had been fighting for 6 days, watching their defenses crumble one by one. When the human ships appeared on their sensors, many thought it was a mistake. Others thought it was a cruel joke. The humans had abandoned them months ago. Why would they return now? Admiral Sunho opened a communication channel that broadcast to every receiver in the system. His voice was calm and steady, like a doctor telling a patient that everything would be all right. Attention, Velron forces and citizens. This is Admiral Sunho of Earth's Stellar Navy. We have come to help. All Velron ships, fall back behind our line. All civilian transports, begin evacuation immediately. We will hold the swarm here. For a moment, no one moved. The Velron military commanders could not believe what they were hearing. These were the insects they had mocked. These were the primitives they had sent away. Why were they here? Do as they say. A young Velron officer shouted. Fall back. Let the humans take the front. The Velron fleet retreated behind the human line. Some of the older commanders wanted to protest. They wanted to say that Velrons did not hide behind inferior species. But their ships were burning and their weapons were empty. So they swallowed their pride and did as wide. They were told. The human fleet spread out into a defensive wall between the swarm and the planet. Taiho watched the approaching cloud of darkness on his tactical display. It was massive, larger than any formation he had ever seen. Billions upon billions of tiny machines, each one hungry, each one deadly. All ships, he ordered, prepare for close-range engagement. Remember your training. The swarm is most vulnerable at its core. We punch through the outer layers, hit the central controllers, and the rest will fall apart. He paused. And remember, we are not here for glory. We are here to save lives. Every civilian that escapes is a victory. Every minute we buy is precious. Do your duty. The swarm reached the human line. What followed was the most brutal space battle in living memory. The human ships waded into the darkness like swimmers entering a storm. Their heavy guns fired continuously, each shot destroying thousands of the tiny machines. But for every 1,000 they destroyed, 1,000,000 more took their place. The swarm crashed against human armor like waves against rocks. The humans did not run. They stood their ground and fired and fired and fired. Ships burned. Crews died. Still, they did not retreat. Commander Taiho led the assault on the swarm's core. His ship punched through layer after layer of machines, taking damage with every meter of progress. Warning lights flashed across his bridge. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Weapons systems overheating. Shields failing. He did not stop. Almost there, his navigation officer reported. Central controller detected. 1 kilometer ahead. All power to forward guns, Taiho ordered. Fire everything we have. The eternal dawn unleashed a wall of fire that lit up the darkness. The swarm's central controller, a machine the size of a small moon, shattered into 1,000,000,000,000 pieces. Without its guidance, the surrounding machines went wild. They attacked each other instead of the humans. They crashed into debris. They lost all coordination. A cheer went up across the human fleet. The swarm was breaking apart, but the battle was not over. On the ground, millions of Velran citizens were still trapped in cities under attack. Ground swarm units had already landed on the planet, smaller machines that crawled through streets and consumed everything in their path. The orbital battle was only half the fight. Prepare drop pods, Taiho ordered. I am going down personally. His officers tried to protest. He was a fleet commander, not a ground soldier. He had already done enough. But Taiho was already walking toward the drop bay. He put on his combat armor himself, piece by piece. He loaded his weapons. He checked every system twice. The drop pod fell through the atmosphere like a burning star. It crashed into a plaza in the center of a city called Silverweave. All around him, Velran citizens ran screaming from the ground swarm. The machines were everywhere, crawling over buildings, eating vehicles, grabbing anyone too slow to escape. Taiho stepped out of his pod and started shooting. He was not alone for long. Human soldiers dropped from the sky by the thousands. They formed defensive lines around civilian evacuation points. They carried wounded Velrans to safety on their backs. They stood between the weak and the hungry machines, and they did not give ground. The fighting lasted for hours. Taiho lost count of how many machines he destroyed. His armor was scratched and dented. His weapons were overheating. His body was screaming for rest. But every time he wanted to stop, he saw another group of civilians that needed protection. A family hiding in a ruined building. Children crying for parents they would never see again. Old people too slow to run. He saved them all. He carried them to the evacuation ships. He promised them they would be safe. Queen Myre watched from her palace on the Velran homeworld. Every screen showed the same thing. Human soldiers fighting and dying to protect Velran citizens. She saw them throw themselves in front of machines to shield innocent people. She saw them give their own medical supplies to wounded Velrans. She saw them work until they dropped from exhaustion, then get up and keep working. These were the insects she had laughed at. These were the primitives she had called worthless. They were dying to save her people, and she had not even asked nicely. For the first time in her life, Queen Myre wept. The battle for Brighthold lasted 3 days. When it was finally over, 90% of the population had been evacuated. The swarm had been destroyed. Human losses were heavy, over 12,000 soldiers dead and another 40,000 wounded. Velran losses would have been complete extinction without human intervention. Admiral Sunho personally supervised the rescue operations. He refused to leave until the last civilian was off-planet, until the last wounded soldier was aboard a medical ship, until there was nothing left to do. When a Velrun commander tried to thank him, he simply said, "We are not done yet. There are more worlds that need help." The human fleet moved on. Planet after planet, colony after colony, they fought the swarm wherever it appeared. They did not ask for payment. They did not demand apologies. They simply showed up, did the job, and moved on. Commander Taiho was everywhere. He led ground assaults on 6 different worlds. He personally rescued over 1,000 civilians. He was wounded twice and refused to stop fighting. His soldiers would have followed him into the core of a star. Word spread across the empire. The humans were coming. The humans were fighting. The humans were winning. And the Velrun's began to understand something they had never understood before. Strength was not about living 1,000 years. Strength was not about having beautiful ships or ancient technology. Strength was about standing up when everything told you to stay down. Strength was about protecting the weak even when you had been treated badly. The humans were not insects. They were something far more dangerous. They were people who had been underestimated and who had chosen to prove their worth not with words, but with blood and sacrifice and endless, stubborn courage. The swarm fell back. System by system, world by world, humanity pushed them into the dark spaces they had come from. It was not easy. It was not fast. It cost more lives than anyone wanted to count. But in the end, the humans won. They always did. 3 months passed after the humans left Velrun space. Life in the Empire continued as it always had. The nobles held their parties. The merchants sold their goods. The queen sat on her throne and made decisions for her people. Everyone tried to forget about the primitive creatures who had dared to walk away from their glorious civilization. Then the darkness came. It started on a small colony world near the edge of Velrun space. The planet was called Silverlight, home to 40 million Velrun citizens. One morning, their communication systems detected something strange in the outer reaches of their solar system. Something big. Something that had not been there the day before. The colony sent a scout ship to investigate. The ship never returned. Its last transmission was only 4 words. "It is eating us." Within 6 hours, Silverlight went silent. Every communication channel, every emergency beacon, every distress signal simply stopped. A rescue fleet was sent to find out what had happened. They found only debris floating in space where a planet used to be. No survivors. No bodies. No explanation. Just emptiness where 40 million souls had lived. The Harken swarm had arrived. They were not alive. Not in any way that made sense. They were machines, ancient and terrible, older than the Velrun Empire, older than most stars. No one knew where they came from or why they existed. They simply appeared from the dark spaces between galaxies, consumed everything in their path, and then disappeared again. They looked like clouds of black metal dust. Billions upon billions of tiny machines working together as one hungry mind. They ate planets. They ate moons. They ate ships and stations and anything else they could find. They turned matter into more of themselves, growing larger and hungrier with every world they consumed. The Velrun military responded immediately. They sent their finest fleets to meet this threat. These were the same ships that had conquered half the known universe. The same weapons that had destroyed civilizations that refused to submit. The same warriors who had never known defeat. The Harken swarm destroyed them in less than an hour. The elegant Velrun ships burned like paper in a fire. Their advanced weapons did nothing. Their powerful shields were useless. The swarm simply flowed around their defenses and ate them from the inside. Thousands of Velrun soldiers died screaming as tiny machines crawled through their ships and consumed everything they touched. Queen Myre watched the battle from her palace on the Velrun homeworld. She watched her mighty fleet become dust. She watched her empire's greatest warriors disappear into the darkness. For the first time in her life, she felt something she had never felt before. Fear. What are these things? She demanded. Where did they come from? Why did no one warn us? Her advisors looked at each other nervously. Finally, one of them spoke. He was an old noble who had served the empire for 500 years. His voice shook as he answered. Your Majesty, the humans warned us. They told us they were monitoring unusual activity in the dark regions. They offered to share their findings, but we rejected their alliance. We called them insects. We sent them away. Queen Marae's face went pale. She remembered Commander Taiho standing in her throne room. She remembered his silence. She remembered his calm eyes as he turned and walked away. Contact the humans, she ordered. Send a message to Earth. Tell them we need help. The message was sent. The Queen waited for a reply. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. The communication officer approached the throne with a nervous expression. Your Majesty, there is no response. Earth has received our message, but they have not replied. Queen Mirae gripped the arms of her throne so hard that her knuckles turned white. Send another message. Tell them this is an emergency. Tell them millions of lives are at stake. Another message was sent. Another message received no answer. Over the next few weeks, the Harken swarm continued its advance through Velrun space. Colony after colony fell silent. World after world disappeared. The Empire's military threw everything they had against the swarm, and everything failed. Weapons designed to crack planets barely slowed the machines down. Technology that had taken 10,000 years to develop was useless against an enemy that ate technology for breakfast. The death count rose into the billions. Queen Myra sent message after message to Earth. She begged. She pleaded. She offered wealth, territory, anything the humans wanted. She even apologized for her words, though the apology felt hollow and insincere even as she spoke it. Still, the humans did not answer. Commander Taiho sat in his quarters aboard the human dreadnought Eternal Dawn. The ship floated in deep space, far from Velrun territory but close enough to monitor what was happening. Taiho read every message the Queen sent. He read her threats. He read her bribes. He read her desperate pleas. He felt nothing. No, that was not quite true. He felt something. He felt tired. He felt sad. He felt a deep and ancient weariness that came from watching beings who could not learn from their mistakes. Admiral Sunho appeared on his communication screen. The Admiral's face was grim. Commander, I assume you have been following the situation in Velrun space. I have, sir. The Council has been debating our response. Some believe we should let the Velruns face the consequences of their arrogance. Others believe we have a moral duty to help, regardless of how we have been treated. Admiral Sunho paused. I would like to hear your thoughts. Taiho was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the Queen's laughter. He thought about the nobles pointing at him like he was an animal in a cage. He thought about being called an insect, a primitive creature, a thing that did not matter. Then he thought about the children on those colony worlds, the families who had done nothing wrong, the ordinary people who had never set foot in the Queen's throne room, who had never laughed at a human, who were dying simply because they happened to be born under the wrong flag. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. The Queen and her nobles deserve everything that is happening to them. They are cruel, arrogant, and stupid. They mocked us because we live short lives, as if the length of a life determines its value. They called us insects because we are small, as if size determines strength. Taiho's voice hardened. I would be happy to let them choke on their pride. Admiral Sunho nodded slowly. But there are billions of innocent people dying, sir. People who never insulted us. People who never had a choice in how their empire treated humanity. People who were just trying to live and love and raise their families. Taiho took a deep breath. And there's another consideration, which is, the Harken Swarm will not stop at Velrun space. Once they finish consuming the Empire, they will spread to other regions. They will find their way to human colonies eventually. If we fight them now, while they are smaller and we can contain them, we have a chance. If we wait until they have eaten an entire empire, Taiho shook his head. We may not survive that fight. Admiral Sunho was silent for a long moment. Then he asked a question that would decide everything. Do we help those who despise us, Commander? Taiho looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, billions of people were dying. Some of them had laughed at him. Most of them had not. Did it matter? Did the sins of the Queen fall upon her people? Yes, sir, he said finally. We help them. Not because they deserve it. Not because they ask nicely. We help them because that is who we are. Because humanity does not become something smaller just because others tried to make us feel small. We help them because we can, and because it is right. Admiral Sunho smiled for the first time in weeks. I was hoping you would say that. The fleet is already assembling. We move out in 12 hours. Taiho saluted. Yes, sir. I will be ready. The communication ended. Taiho stood alone in his quarters, looking at the approaching darkness on his tactical display. The Harken Swarm was coming. The Velruns were dying. And humanity was about to prove something that no amount of words could ever express. Sometimes the smallest insects have the sharpest stings. Commander Taiho returned to the human embassy ship within the hour. He walked through the airlock and went straight to the communication room. Ambassador Yuna was waiting for him there, her face tight with concern. She had watched the entire meeting through a hidden camera in his uniform. Taiho, she said softly, I am so sorry. What she said to you, what they all said. It does not matter what they said to me, Taiho replied. His voice was calm, almost gentle. What matters is what they think of all of us, of every human, of our children and grandchildren yet to be born. He sat down at the communication console. Please contact Earth Command. Priority Alpha. Ambassador Yuna nodded. She understood. This was no longer about trade agreements or military cooperation. This was about dignity. This was about the future. The message reached Earth in 30 minutes, faster than any normal transmission. The response came back in 2 hours. It contained only 5 words. Come home. Bring everyone. The withdrawal began immediately. Within 12 hours, every human trader in Velrun space had packed their goods and closed their shops. Within 24 hours, every human scientist had left their research stations on Velrun colony worlds. Within 48 hours, every human ship had departed from Velrun ports. There were no explanations. There were no arguments or negotiations. There were no angry letters or formal protests. The humans simply left, quietly and completely, like guests who had decided the party was no longer worth attending. The Velrun government did not notice at first. They were too busy celebrating their queen's great victory. The nobles held parties and drank expensive wine and told each other stories about the foolish human commander who had dared to stand before their queen. They laughed about his silence, calling it proof of human stupidity. They did not even try to defend themselves. One noble said proudly, "They know they are inferior. They accepted their place in the natural order. The universe is better this way," another agreed. "Now we can focus on truly important matters without wasting time on those primitive creatures." But on the third day, the Velrun Ministry of Trade sent an urgent message to the palace. Human ships were no longer arriving at Velrun ports. Human traders were no longer selling their goods in Velrun markets. The special metals that humans mined from their asteroid belts Metals that were essential for Velran medical equipment were suddenly unavailable. Queen Myre dismissed the concern with a wave of her hand. "Find other suppliers," she ordered. "We do not need anything from insects." A week later, the Velran Military Council presented a more serious problem. The joint patrols in the outer territories had stopped. Human ships no longer shared information about potential threats. The humans had been monitoring something in the dark regions beyond Velran space, something they called unusual activity. Now that monitoring had ended. What kind of unusual activity? Queen Myre demanded. The military commander shook his head. "We do not know, Your Majesty. The humans never told us the details. They said they were investigating and would share their findings when they knew more." Then it was probably nothing, the Queen decided. The humans are paranoid creatures. They see danger in every shadow. We have protected ourselves for 100,000 years. We do not need their help to protect ourselves now. Ambassador Yuna sent one final message to the Velran Council before leaving their space. It was short and formal. It thanked the Velrans for their hospitality. It expressed hope that future generations might find better understanding between their peoples. And it ended with a warning that was also a goodbye. Humanity never forgets an insult. But humanity also never explains itself twice. We came to you as friends. We leave as strangers. What we become next is entirely your choice. Remember this. We will not come back unless you ask. And even then, we may not answer. The message was read aloud in the Velran Council chamber. Some of the older nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They remembered the human silence. They remembered the look in Commander Taiho's eyes before he turned away. That look had not been the look of a defeated man. It had been the look of a man making a decision. But Queen Myre only laughed. "Let them go," she announced. "Let them hide in their small corner of space. We are the Velran Empire. We have conquered galaxies. We have outlasted civilizations that the humans have never even heard of. We are eternal. They are temporary." She stood from her throne and raised her arms. "Today, we celebrate our independence from the weakness of lesser species." The court cheered. The nobles applauded. Musicians played triumphant songs. Dancers performed ancient victories. The celebration lasted for 3 days. Meanwhile, Commander Taiho sat in his quarters aboard the embassy ship as it traveled home to Earth. He looked out the window at the stars passing by. Ambassador Yuna came to check on him several times, but he always said the same thing. "I am fine. I am just thinking." What he was thinking about, he did not share. The journey to Earth took 2 weeks. When they arrived, Taiho was immediately summoned to Stellar Navy headquarters. He walked through halls filled with officers and officials, all of them watching him with curious eyes. The story of what happened in the Velran throne room had already spread. Everyone knew. Everyone had an opinion. Some thought Taiho had been too passive. They said he should have defended humanity's honor. They said his silence made them all look weak. Others understood. They knew that words meant nothing to people who had already made up their minds. They knew that arguing with contempt only fed it. They knew that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Admiral Sunho was waiting in the command center. He was an older man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. He had commanded human fleets against threats that most people did not even know existed. He was not a man who was impressed easily. "Commander Taiho," he said. "Report." Taiho stood at attention. "The Velran Empire has rejected our offer of alliance, sir. They view humanity as an inferior species not worthy of partnership. I recommend we redirect our resources to other regions and other potential allies." Admiral Sunho nodded slowly. "And what about the monitoring stations in the outer territories? The ones that were watching the dark regions?" Taiho hesitated for only a moment. I recommend we continue monitoring from a distance, sir. But we should not share our findings with the Volrans. They have made it clear they do not want our help, even if what we find might threaten them. They called us insects, sir. They said we do not matter. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps our warnings do not matter either. Admiral Sunho studied Taiho's face for a long time. He saw the calm exterior. He saw the steady eyes. But he also saw something else underneath, something that the Velran Queen had not been smart enough to recognize. Commander Taiho was angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns bright and dies fast. No, this was cold anger. Patient anger. The kind of anger that waits and watches and remembers. The kind of anger that the universe should fear. Very well, Admiral Sunho said finally. We will continue our monitoring. We will prepare for what may come. And we will remember who our friends are. He paused. And who they are not. Taiho saluted and turned to leave. Commander, Admiral Sunho called out. For what it is worth, I think you did the right thing. Words are easy. Silence is hard. You chose the harder path. Taiho looked back over his shoulder. Thank you, Admiral. But it was not hard at all. The Queen wanted a reaction. I refused to give her one. Now she will spend the rest of her reign wondering what I was thinking in that throne room. A small, cold smile crossed his face. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. They will understand eventually. Humans always have the last word. Sometimes that word is spoken. Sometimes it is not. He walked out of the command center, leaving Admiral Sunho alone with his thoughts. Outside, the stars continued to shine. And somewhere in the dark regions beyond explored space, something ancient and terrible was waking up. The throne room of the Velran Empire was the most beautiful place in the known galaxy. Giant pillars made of white crystal rose toward a ceiling painted with stars. Golden light poured through windows that were taller than most human buildings. Everything in this room was designed to make visitors feel small and weak. Commander Taiho walked through the center of this great hall. His boots made soft sounds on the polished floor. He wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's Stellar Navy. No gold decorations. No fancy medals on display. Just clean fabric and straight lines. Behind him walked two junior officers, their faces calm and professional. Hundreds of Velran nobles stood on both sides of the hall. They were tall and elegant creatures with silver blue skin and eyes that glowed like distant stars. They lived for thousands of years. They had traveled between galaxies when humans were still learning to make fire. They looked at Taiho the way a person might look at an insect that had wandered into their home. At the end of the hall sat Queen Mireille on her throne of living crystal. She was young for a Velran, only 26 years old, but she had already ruled for 3 years. Her silver hair flowed down her shoulders like liquid metal. Her eyes burned with cold blue light. She was beautiful in the way that a sharp blade is beautiful, and just as dangerous. Taiho stopped at the proper distance from the throne. He bowed exactly as deep as protocol required. Not 1 centimeter more, not 1 centimeter less. Then he straightened and waited. Queen Mireille studied him for a long moment. Her lips curved into a small smile that held no warmth. So, she said, her voice filling the hall like music. Earth sends me a soldier to discuss alliance terms. How very human of them. Some nobles laughed softly. Taiho said nothing. His face remained calm and patient. Tell me, Commander, the Queen continued, leaning forward on her throne. How old are you? 34 years, Your Majesty, Taiho answered. His voice was steady and clear. The Queen's smile grew wider. 34 years. How precious. I have dresses older than you. My grandmother's pet lived longer than your entire species has existed. She waved her hand dismissively. And yet you come here, to this ancient hall, to offer us an alliance. As if we are equals. The laughter from the nobles grew louder. Taiho stood still like a statue carved from stone. I have read about your Earth, Queen Myrae said. She stood from her throne and walked down the steps slowly. One small planet circling one small star in one forgotten corner of a minor galaxy. Your people crawled out of the mud only yesterday. You have no real technology. You have no culture worth mentioning. You die so quickly that by the time you learn anything useful, you are already turning to dust. She stopped directly in front of Taiho. She was taller than him by almost a full head. She looked down at him with eyes full of amusement and contempt. My advisors tell me that humans are clever, that you adapt quickly, that you are survivors. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. But I see now what you truly are. You are insects playing at being people. You dress up in your little uniforms and fly your little ships and pretend that you matter. But you do not matter. You have never mattered. And you never will. The throne room exploded with laughter. Nobles pointed at Taiho and whispered to each other. Some did not even try to hide their mockery. They laughed openly, their beautiful faces twisted with cruel joy. Taiho stood in the center of it all. He did not speak. He did not defend himself or his people. He did not show anger or shame or hurt. His face was as calm as a frozen lake. His eyes were steady and unreadable. Queen Myrae watched him carefully, waiting for a reaction. She wanted him to shout. She wanted him to beg. She wanted him to threaten or cry, or do something that would prove her right about these primitive humans. But Taiho gave her nothing. The laughter slowly died down. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the mockery had been. Queen Myrae frowned slightly. This was not how this was supposed to go. Well, she demanded, have you nothing to say? No defense of your pathetic species? No angry words for your queen? Taiho looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, something old and deep and patient. Then, without a single word, he bowed again. The same perfect bow as before. Not 1 centimeter more, not 1 centimeter less. He turned around and walked away. His boots made the same soft sounds on the polished floor. His back was straight. His pace was steady. He did not hurry, and he did not slow down. He simply walked toward the great doors at the end of the hall. The 2 junior officers followed him without question. Queen Myrae stared at his retreating back. Her mouth opened slightly in surprise. This had never happened before. No one walked away from the Queen of the Velran Empire. No one left her presence without being dismissed. No one treated her throne room like a place they could simply leave whenever they wanted. Stop, she commanded. I did not give you permission to leave. Taiho did not stop. He did not turn around. He did not acknowledge her words at all. He just kept walking. Commander, the Queen's voice rose higher. I am speaking to you. You will answer your Queen. But Taiho was not her subject. Earth had never bowed to the Velran Empire. They had come to offer friendship, not to become servants. And friends do not accept insults. The great doors opened before him. Taiho walked through them and disappeared from sight. The doors closed behind him with a sound like the ending of something that could never be started. Again, Queen Myrae stood in her throne room, surrounded by her nobles, her mouth hanging open. She had expected many things from this meeting. She had expected the humans to agree to her demands. She had expected them to accept their lower position. She had expected fear, respect, or at least desperate attempts to win her favor. She had not expected silence. The nobles looked at each other nervously. No one knew what to say. The Queen's face slowly turned hard and cold. She climbed back to her throne and sat down heavily. Good riddance, she announced loudly. We need nothing from such primitive creatures. The Velran Empire has stood for 100,000 years. We will stand for 100,000 more, with or without the help of insects." The nobles agreed loudly. They told their queen how wise she was, how right she was, how the humans were not worth her time. They laughed again about the foolish commander who thought he could walk away from a queen. But some of them, the older and wiser ones, did not laugh. They looked at those closed doors with worried eyes. They remembered an old saying from ancient times: "Fear not the enemy who threatens you loudly. Fear the enemy who says nothing at all." Commander Taiho said nothing, and that silence would echo across the stars for years to come.